Superman, Last Son of Krypton by Elliot S. Maughan, Chapter 5, The Anchorman. Years of wonder and terror came and went. Years of multimedia and future shock. Of Camelot and war of attrition. Men walked on the moon and women marched in the streets. Economic and social institutions fell with the sound of rolling thunder, and self-proclaimed prophets rode private jets to preach of an end to material values. Cities of silver, towers raked at the sky like wire hairbrushes, and ancient lakes went stagnant and dead, and the world was afflicted with a hero. Among the monoliths in the city of Metropolis stood the Galaxy Building, housing a communications network that reached a greater percentage of the world's population than any spoken or written word since the voice of God told Adam it was time to wake up on the morning of the sixth day. Here in Metropolis were the theaters and the film companies, the advertising agencies, the publishers, the design and garment manufacturing centers, the think tanks and universities, the ideas, the energy, the vitality that drew young men and women from thousands of miles around to grab at a piece of their own particular dream. One of the young men who came to Metropolis was Clark Kent of Smallville, to study journalism at Metropolis University, to land a staff reporter's job at the Daily Planet, and later to become local news anchorman at WGBS, the flagship television station of the Galaxy Broadcasting System. The bespectacled Kent was tall, dark, and inoffensively handsome. His voice could be broadcast to millions of viewers each day, and he could walk through midtown crowds without being recognized by a living soul. Morgan Edge, the president of Galaxy Communications and wonderkind of the network television industry, discovered Clark Kent when Galaxy bought the Daily Planet. Edge reassigned Kent to television news, and it was not until 2 years later that it occurred to the executive that newspaper experience made Kent capable of doing more than reading aloud the words written by someone else. So besides being anchorman of the local evening news, Kent was associate producer of the show. This made it his responsibility to see that available reporters and crews were assigned to the right stories and to decide what news was to be covered in the daily hour-long broadcast. It also meant that Kent had to be in the newsroom before anyone else, going over news wires and trying to figure out in mid-morning what the news would be by the end of the day. "Hey, Clarky, what's news?" Steve Lombard, the sports broadcaster and former first-string quarterback for the Metropolis Astros, lumbered into the newsroom full of clicking wire service receivers and clacking typewriters. "Get it? What's news? Ain't anybody got a sense of humor around here?" "Good morning, Steve." Clark smiled as he tried to figure out whether he should eliminate a story about a 12-year-old girl swimming across Long Island Sound in favor of a 19-year-old engineering student who had equipped a Volkswagen to run on 12 storage batteries instead of gasoline. "Ah, good old conscientious, punctual, enterprising, dull Clarky. Can't you say anything besides good morning?" Nice day, isn't it?" The engineering student had a distracting tic when he talked. Clark decided that for television, the little girl was more newsworthy. "Same old faces around here," Lombard muttered. "Same old routine. Boy, oh boy, when they told me I was going to be on the tube every day, I figured the chicks would be climbing the walls like King Kong to get next to me." "They're not?" "Well, I suppose they are, but there's something missing, know what I mean, Clarky?" "What do you mean, Steve? Love? Affection? The sort of thing that makes lasting relationships, right?" "No, I got all that. Maybe I should grow a mustache." "What have you got lined up for the sports spot, Steve? Isn't this day the day you do your on-air interview with Pele?" "Yeah! Hey! Steve cuffed Clark on the shoulder, and Clark fell back clumsily, more out of concern for Steve's hand than anything else. "Guy can sure kick a soccer sucker. Hey! Clark, get it?" "Got it." "He'll be here about 4:30. Great guy. Had a Bloody Mary with the dude last night at the ground floor." "He broke training?" "Nah, the season ended last month. You gotta keep up with the news, man. This waitress, Maureen, the one with all the low-cut drinks, she kept coming on to him, just to be nice, 'cause he's a friend of mine." "Couldn't be. She liked him, could it?" "Sure she liked him." "How do you know?" "She told me when I dropped her off at work this morning." "Why's the place so dead today?" "Had to send a lot of crews on the road." Slow news day in town, eh? Smatter, old musclehead ain't helped any old ladies across the street with super breath lately? I guess there hasn't been anything spectacular for him to do in the past few days. Maybe he's worried about Luther's escape last week. Luther, huh? He's been in the headlines since he broke out again, and nobody's seen hide nor hair of him. Pretty hard to see a hair of him, right? Get it? As long as the FBI issues statements that they expect an arrest within 24 hours, we've got something to say about him. Aw, that bald fruit's not human. Third time he's broken out this year, ain't it? Fourth, if you count last New Year's Eve. Everyone knows the FBI's not in Luther's league. We're just waiting for another showdown between Baldy and the super guy, right? I suppose, but Superman doesn't issue a press release every day, so we go with what we've got. The people of Metropolis were secure enough in their big city provincialism to look up when they heard the high-pitched wind tunnel sound in the sky no more often than they looked at the tops of the buildings around them. But there were still the tourists on the crowded streets who responded when some lunkhead yelled, "Look, up in the sky!" Someone would always answer, "It's a bird!" And then a few people would yell, "It's a plane!" And in a boom of voices that was more often than not louder than the whistling wind in the sky, "It's Superman!" Then again, few were the natives who had been out of town for some days who did not find themselves joining in the chant, and then swelling with territorial pride under their button-down collars. Superman was a public phenomenon without precedent. No other public figure, even in the golden age of monarchy, ever so excited people's imaginations, almost from the time of his birth, from the fanciful reports of a flying baby in a red and blue play suit 20 and 30 years ago, to the public appearance of a teenage Superboy from a lost planet, to the conferring of international citizenship on Superman by the United Nations years ago, this alien had become the most famous man on Earth. If a news show had lots of Superman film, it became popular. If a magazine had him on the cover, it outsold everything else competing for rack space. If he made a public appearance, the locals talked about it for years. Children played in imitations of his red cape. He made skin-tight outfits, especially in red and blue, or a current fashion among men not generally given to fads. The symbol he wore on his chest, a stylized S and a symmetrical irregular pentagon, was the most widely recognized trademark in the world. His crusade against crime, his awesome feats to minimize natural and man-made disasters inspired millions of people to enter crime prevention, conservation, medical research, and similar fields. He could fly under his own power. He was strong enough to juggle planetoids, indestructible enough to take a steam bath in the core of a star. And he had the ability to see through most solid objects and hear for unlimited distances. No other human could do what Superman could do. Every other human aspired to be him. He brought with him the birth of an age of humanitarianism on Earth. He reawakened the hope for peace. There were those who said there was a dark side to his presence as well. At lunchtime, Clark Kent's blackboard in the WGBS newsroom was nearly filled with assignments. Tricia Fellens was downtown with an Auricon crew filming a piece on the safety of schoolyard playgrounds. In the city, Johnny Green was covering the mayor's press conference on drug rehabilitation programs. The mayor was bucking for a Senate nomination, and Green was bucking for a post in the new senator's press secretary. Jimmy Olsen was 60 miles away with a videotape crew at Princeton University's Institute for Advanced Studies, covering the opening of hitherto unseen documents left in a vault nearly 30 years ago by the late Professor Albert Einstein, being processed in the lab was a 3-minute Planet Spot feature about how to cope with an indoor colus that grew big enough to take over the room. Already in the can was a special 6-minute film in Cathay Thomas's series on the artists who were living in the converted lofts in an area of Metropolis that was once a crime-ridden eyesore. 3 young reporters were running up enormous phone bills, double-checking the authenticity of the hard news coming in from around the world via Associated Press and United Press International. Oscar Asherman was on the Galaxy building roof, playing with his barometers and anemometers like a child fascinated with an erector set. Steve Lombard was in a corner, feigning ignorance of the English language in order to have an excuse to enlist Janet Terry, fresh as peaches out of the Columbia School of Journalism, to help him on copy to accompany the sports footage. By lunchtime, Clark Kent's daily wrestling match with the WGBS 6 o'clock evening news was largely won, and Lois Lane was on her way up from the sixth-floor offices of the Daily Planet for their lunch date. The bell rang twice on the Associated Press wire, not enough to cut into programming with a bulletin, but significant enough for the associate producer of the city's major local news show to get up from his typewriter and see what was up. As Clark held up the rolling yellow sheet of paper and watched the story type itself out, he saw Lois step out of his office, down the hall, and waved at her. "Hey, Clarky, what's poppin'?" came a voice from the same direction as another swat on his shoulder. "Well, well, will you look at who's prancing down the hall, dressed to stop a convoy. Heavy lunch hour, Clark?" "Oh, Lois, guess so." Lombard seemed to smell the lady approaching at 3 o'clock out of a cloud like a World War I ace. "Weren't you showing the new girl, Janet, how to write two film, Steve?" "She'll be all right in the editing room. She's a fast learner. Hello, Lois." "How's it hanging, Grizzly?" Lois stepped in the hallway door. "What are we doing for lunch, Clark?" "Oh, I thought maybe patty and brew or—" "Yeah, Clarky." Lombard tried hard to look as genial as a hibernating polar bear. "What are we doing for lunch? Taking a Learjet to Paris for hors d'oeuvres, Morocco for beef curry, dessert in New Orleans?" "Get off, Grizzly. You know the last time Clark had a comeback for a one-liner, he fell off his moa." "Lois, isn't anybody on my side?" Clark's exclamation was only in his words. He seemed never to rise above a conversational tone or a walking speed. Steve Lombard was another matter. Lois had long ago stopped feeling guilty about the amusement she felt when she watched the two men together. She realized that there was no point feeling guilty because Steve seemed, under it all, quite as incompetent as Clark at human interaction. Like now, for example, she allowed a creamy grin as Steve waved a hand, talking and trying to distract her and Clark. As he used the other hand to slip the corner of Clark's jacket, it apparently never occurred to Clark to take off the jacket indoors, into the roller from which the two-alarm story was emerging. What would happen next, Lois thought, was that as Steve tried to turn the crank, pulling Clark's jacket into the machine and making him look stupid, a firebell would ring, and Clark would jump away in time, or a light fixture would fall on Steve's head, or the big boss, Mr. Edge, would walk in and yell at Steve for horsing around, or, as Steve leaned back to yank the handle and mangle Clark's suit, the crank picked that moment to fall off in Steve's hand, and leverage left the quarterback sprawled on the floor in a pile of discarded wire copy. Unflappable, Clark Kent ripped off the current message about a swarm of hang gliders seen approaching from the outskirts of the city and dropped it on Steve's face. "Gotta eat, Steve. Would you have somebody check out this story while I'm gone?" "Nuts!" The sportscaster flew off his feet and down the hall ahead of Clark and Lois. He bumped into a cute young copy girl on her way to the newsroom and snarled, "Who are you?" Layla Hairstall. I shouldn't be working on your lunch hour. My treat." "Really?" "Sure, Mr. Lombard." "Look at him, Clark. One after the other. You think he collects scalps or puts notches on his shoulder pads or something. Don't know, Lois, but someday he's liable to injure himself." What no one had noticed was that the crank of the Associated Press ticker had not broken. It had melted. Clark would cover up the fact the first chance he got. And we will pause there.